Welcome to this journey into the unknown, into a story that challenges the limits of our perception and forces us to question what we understand is real. Today, we will dive into The Color Out of Space, one of H.P. Lovecraft's most unsettling and mysterious tales. A story that, despite having been written nearly a century ago, continues to terrify and fascinate those brave enough to read it. Imagine a place where the sky seems to hide dark secrets, where the ground we walk on is no longer safe, where nature itself appears to turn against its inhabitants. This is the setting Lovecraft presents in The Color Out of Space. The author takes us to the outskirts of Arkham, a small, fictional town in Massachusetts, known for being the epicenter of inexplicable events and supernatural phenomena. But this time, it isn't an ancient, powerful entity lurking or a sinister cult plotting in the shadows. No, this time, the terror comes from something that, at first glance, seems harmless: a color. How can a color, something so abstract and ordinary, become the origin of the most horrifying nightmare ever told? That is the question Lovecraft leaves hanging in the air with this story. But this is not just any color. This is a hue beyond human understanding, a phenomenon that seems unreal, almost impossible. A color that defies all explanation. A shade that doesn't belong in the known spectrum, something that even our senses cannot process correctly. The story begins with a meteorite crashing down onto the farm of the Gardner family. A simple family living off the land, whose lives are about to change forever. When this piece of the sky, seemingly harmless at first, crashes onto their property, it brings something with it. Something that, in Lovecraft's words, is indescribable, a shadow from another world, a color that has no name. And here, Lovecraft demonstrates his unique ability to make us feel uneasy, to immerse us in a state of constant discomfort. Because as we read, we sense that something is not right, that we are dealing with something we should not be trying to understand, something beyond our capacity for comprehension. The story of The Color Out of Space is not just a horror story, it is a warning. Lovecraft reminds us of how small we are in the vast universe, how little we truly understand and how much we ignore. He makes us wonder if we are truly prepared to face what lies beyond our perception. What would happen if an alien force, incomprehensible to humans, decided to appear in our world? How could we defend ourselves against something we cannot see, something our eyes and minds cannot process? Lovecraft invites us to enter this story, to accompany the Gardner family on their journey toward madness and despair. He takes us by the hand to the edge of an abyss where science and reason have no place, where everything we thought we knew crumbles into thin air. Because in The Color Out of Space, Lovecraft doesn't just create a story, he crafts an unsolvable mystery. Each page is a door opening to the unknown, a step closer to the darkness lurking beyond our sight. This tale has left a profound mark on the genre of cosmic horror, proving that horror doesn't always require monsters or nightmarish beings. Sometimes, horror can be found in the most mundane things, in a simple color, in an imperceptible whisper, in something that should not be here, in something from a place we can't even imagine. Lovecraft teaches us that there are mysteries we should never unravel, and The Color Out of Space is undoubtedly one of those mysteries. Are you ready to learn the story of the Gardner family? Are you prepared to gaze into the vastness of the cosmos and confront the abyss lurking within? Join us in this exploration of The Color Out of Space. And remember, what you are about to hear is not just a horror story. It's a warning that there are things in the universe we are not meant to understand, things that could shatter reality itself if we dared to look too closely. We find ourselves on the outskirts of Arkham, a fictional town created by Lovecraft, a place that, in his work, often serves as a convergence point for the darkest and most mysterious events. Arkham is an isolated, ancient community steeped in secrets, a place where folklore and superstitions are so deeply ingrained in its residents that they become an essential part of daily life. The inhabitants of Arkham distrust anything they cannot explain. Any strange event becomes a source of fear, and anyone who strays from the norm is regarded with suspicion. Yet despite their fears, the villagers remain silent, and keep their heads down, as if they understand, deep within themselves, that some things are better left uninvestigated. The story begins with an anonymous narrator, a man who has traveled to this remote region of New England to conduct a field study on a hydraulic project. He is about to discover that this region harbors a terrible, ancient secret that the locals prefer not to recall. As the narrator delves into the history of the place, he discovers a desolate area known as the Blasted Heath. It is a barren, lifeless stretch of land where the soil seems cursed by a dark, incomprehensible energy. Drawn by this mystery, the narrator begins asking the villagers about why this desolate, sterile place exists. In response, he receives only silence and warning glances. Some men avert their eyes, while others simply claim to know nothing. No one wants to talk about it. However, one of the village's older residents, a man named Amy Pierce, agrees to tell him the story. Pierce is a man marked by what he experienced back then, a witness to what truly happened. It is he who speaks of the Gardner family and the strange phenomenon that took place years before on the very land that now seems like a dying corpse. Pierce tells the narrator how, years earlier, a meteorite fell from the sky onto the Gardner farm, an ordinary, hard-working family who lived off the land and the tranquility of their home. The arrival of the meteorite was the first event in a chain of inexplicable and terrifying occurrences that would forever transform the land and the lives of the Gardners. Pierce describes the moment of impact, a flash in the sky, a color no one could describe. It wasn't red, blue, or any tone the villagers had ever seen. It was a color that seemed to defy the very laws of reality, a color that simply shouldn't exist. At first, the meteorite seemed harmless, but soon unsettling things began to happen. Scientists from Miskatonic University arrived to investigate the fallen stone, intrigued by the oddness of its properties. However, their analysis only added to the confusion. It was not a simple rock fragment. It seemed to be a living entity, expanding and constantly changing. They tried to take samples, but the material disintegrated as if it didn't want to be understood, as if it was a substance the world was not ready to contain. As time passed, the meteorite began to affect the Gardner farm in insidious and terrifying ways. First, the soil around the farm began to change color. The once fertile, productive fields started to show strange, sickly hues, and the crops grew in unnatural sizes and colors, disturbingly large. Yet despite their exuberant appearance, these fruits were inedible. Anyone who tasted them found a bitter, indescribable, and repulsive flavor, like the very taste of corruption. The farm animals also began to undergo disturbing changes. The cows and sheep, instead of growing fatter, grew more fragile and sickly, as though something were draining the life from them. And then they began to disappear. The gardeners found them in the field dead, with an indescribable expression of terror on their faces, as if in their final moments, they had seen something no living creature should see. Soon, even the smaller animals like dogs and cats began to avoid the farm, fleeing from something they couldn't understand but sensed with clarity beyond human reach. The changes didn't stop with the crops and animals. The Gardner family itself began to notice something dark looming over them. Nahum Gardner, the patriarch, was the first to realize that the color in the ground, the trees, and the water was spreading, contaminating everything around them. His children and wife started to show signs of weakness, exhaustion, and a strange despondency. The mother, in particular, seemed especially sensitive to this influence and began to display a kind of progressive madness, as though something inside her were slowly being devoured. Her mind deteriorated, and her eyes began to reflect an absence, a shadow, as if her spirit had been trapped in another place. As the months went by, the situation on the farm became untenable. The Gardners seemed to live in a nightmare from which they could not escape. It wasn't just the land, the water, and the crops. It was something beyond the physical, something in the air, a presence watching them, slowly consuming them. The atmosphere around the farm grew dense, oppressive, as if the strange color was saturating every particle of oxygen, contaminating even the breaths of those who dared to approach. Despite Nahum's attempts to save his family and land, all efforts were in vain. Whatever had fallen from the sky seemed to have a will of its own, and that will was to destroy, to corrupt everything it touched. It was a slow but inevitable process, like an infection spreading without remedy. And though the neighbors realized that something strange was happening at the Gardner farm, none dared to intervene. People feared the unknown, and what was happening on that farm was something they could not comprehend, something against which they had no defense. Here, Lovecraft introduces us not only to horror, but to the concept of absolute corruption and despair, the terror of facing something that simply has no explanation. Through Pierce's story, the reader begins to feel the weight of the Gardner family's tragedy, trapped in a situation from which they cannot escape, facing a presence that does not belong to this world and follows no human or natural law. Lovecraft uses the farm's isolation to emphasize the idea that when we face the unknown, we are alone. There is no help, no rescue. Only desolation and the horror of the incomprehensible. We find ourselves in the heart of New England, in a rural region that has seen few visitors or changes since time immemorial. Lovecraft transports us to an archaic and isolated world, where modernity and convenience have left no mark, a place surrounded by vast forests, dirt roads, and hills rising like natural walls, guarding ancient and unknown secrets. The distance from the big city is felt in every corner. There are no motor sounds or urban clamor, only the creaking of branches and the whisper of the wind, which seems to carry with it forgotten stories and incomprehensible warnings. At the edge of this desolate and somber setting lies the Gardner farm, a piece of land that, despite being in one of the most fertile areas, has been marked by a strange evil. Here, Lovecraft describes a landscape that, if it was ever prosperous, now appears to have fallen into decay, as if an invisible shadow had drained the life from every plant, tree, and stream. The sky above the farm always seems gray, even on sunny days, and the air has a weight, a density that makes it hard to breathe, as if something contaminated every particle, turning it heavy, dense, and filled with a malignancy that man cannot see but can feel. The path to the farm, once likely flanked by green fields and robust plants, is now lined with withered and deformed vegetation in muted, twisted colors. Trees that once stood tall and alive are now covered by a sickly gray bark, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky like bony hands pleading for help or crying out for vengeance. The soil itself seems to be in agony. It has changed color, and where there used to be fertile brown soil, now there are gray, purple, and reddish stains, as if the very ground is poisoned from its roots. As the narrator approaches, he begins to feel the oppressive atmosphere surrounding the farm. The silence is overwhelming, an eerie absence of sound that shouldn't exist in a place surrounded by nature. There are no birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seems to have stopped. Every step on this barren ground echoes with a muted sound, as if the soil itself absorbs the noise, swallowing any sound that dares to defy its eternal stillness. Lovecraft takes us toward the Gardner house, an old and deteriorating structure that once must have been an ordinary family home, but now seems to have become the dwelling of something inhuman. The house's walls are covered with a sickly patina, as if an invisible layer were corroding them. The windows, mostly covered in dust and cobwebs, reflect only an impenetrable darkness, and the doors, with their worn wood, seem more like sealed tombs than entries to a home. The narrator observes that the house seems to be crumbling, not just because of time, but due to something deeper. It's as if the very structure is surrendering, yielding to an invisible force that has overtaken everything. Around it, the fields are desolate, and the few plants still clinging to life appear strange and unnatural. Colors that shouldn't exist in nature, branches growing at impossible angles, and leaves that look closer to disease than to real vegetation. The stillness and abandonment seem to intensify upon reaching the area known as the Blasted Heath. This place, once fertile, is now unrecognizable. The grass is a sickly gray. The trees are skeletons of what they once were, and the soil itself appears hostile, rejecting any attempt at life. Here, Lovecraft describes more than just a devastated landscape. He describes a place that, in its desolation, seems to have a consciousness. A landscape that's not merely dead, but cursed, tainted by a presence that still pulses in the quiet. The narrator cannot ignore the feeling that something or someone is watching, a presence that doesn't need eyes to keep vigil, a whisper that seems to linger in the very air, murmuring words of warning in a language he does not understand but that his body senses. In the darkness of this environment, each shadow seems to have its own life, moving at the edge of his vision, toying with his most primal fears. Even the water in nearby streams appears to have lost its purity. It's now a strange substance, of an undefinable color, moving with unnatural slowness, reflecting shapes and colors that don't belong in this world. The setting in The Color Out of Space is a character in its own right. Everything seems to have a dark purpose, from the dying trees to the sunlight that barely reaches the area. The atmosphere is oppressive, and that oppression is a tangible presence surrounding anyone who dares to approach. This landscape, once a witness to everyday life, has become a stage for cosmic horror, where the laws of nature have been twisted, altered by a force beyond human understanding. Every detail of the farm and its surroundings seems to speak of the tragedy that has befallen the Gardner family. The desolation and decay are not only visible in the ground, but also in the air, in the very environment that Lovecraft describes with terrifying precision. Everything here screams silent warnings, inviting the narrator, and us, the readers, to retreat before it's too late, before that darkness consuming the farm decides to extend its reach towards something or someone else. Thus, Lovecraft manages not only to set a place, but to establish a state of mind, a fear of the terrain itself, a fear of what each shadow, each whisper in the wind, might signify. The setting is like a prison without walls, where every element contributes to creating an atmosphere of suspense and terror that slowly seeps into the thoughts and the soul of those who behold it. As the story unfolds, the true magnitude of the tragedy that engulfs the Gardner family and their farm begins to reveal itself. We find ourselves immersed in an environment where logic and science seem to dissolve, where the forces governing the world twist in a dark dance that defies human explanation. Through the narrator's words, we discover that something incomprehensible and terrifying has begun to contaminate the surroundings, and the Gardners are merely the first victims of this evil lurking in the ground and in the air. It all started with the mysterious meteorite that fell near the farm. At first, it was simply a curiosity for the people of Arkham. Scientists arrived quickly, intrigued by this strange rock that didn't seem to obey any properties they expected from a typical meteorite. But then, things began to take an unusual turn. The stone seemed to change shape and size over time, as if something was consuming it from within, or as if it were alive. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the meteorite disappeared, leaving only a shadow on the ground, a trace of an indescribable color that seemed to defy human perception. Days passed, and the land around the Gardner farm began to change. Plants began to grow with a strange, unhealthy appearance, developing shades and shapes that did not belong to any known flora. Trees took on a grayish tint, while the water in the well turned murky, with reflections of a color that disturbed anyone who stared at it for too long. What had once been a fertile corner of the region was now a barren field of anomalies. The earth, the water, and the air all seemed to have been infiltrated by something beyond this world. The first to sense the effects of this presence was Mrs. Gardner. Gradually, she began to display strange behavior, as though something had invaded her mind. She was often found sitting silently, staring into nothingness, muttering words about lights and shadows that only she could see. Her eyes held a vacant glow, as if something were draining her soul, and each day she seemed less connected to reality. Afterward, the children began to show signs of being affected. Thaddeus and Merwin, the youngest, exhibited disturbing behavior. They were often seen wandering around the farm, speaking to some invisible presence, as though under the influence of an external force calling them. Their health deteriorated daily, Their gazes grew increasingly vacant. As the family sank further into this nightmare without sense, Nahum Gardner, the patriarch, found himself increasingly helpless, watching his family and farm crumble beyond repair. Nature around the farm also suffered. The farm animals behaved strangely. Some refused to approach the well, while others seemed to lose all traces of natural instinct. Crops, once abundant, now grew with unnatural deformities, colored in shades not belonging to this world, with a disturbing glow under the moonlight. The family attempted to eat the produce from their crops, but each time they did, they experienced a deep-seated sickness, an inexplicable unease that weakened them. It was as though the land itself was infected, and anything that sprouted from it was doomed. As time passed, the situation on the farm became unbearable. Visitors, though few, noticed the eerie transformation of the property and those living on it. Neighbors and villagers began to whisper about what was happening at the Gardner farm. No one wanted to come near the place where the very earth seemed poisoned, and the family, once part of the community, now evoked fear and suspicion. Rumors of curses and supernatural forces lurking on the farm began to spread. Nahum's despair deepened as he witnessed his family's disintegration. Mrs. Gardner, once the backbone of the household, was now engulfed in a state of dementia. Her whispers grew increasingly incoherent and dark. She spoke of things she had seen in the air, describing formless figures only she could perceive. The children's health declined at an alarming rate. Their faces became pale and skeletal, their movements erratic and lifeless. The cursed color emanating from the well seemed to intensify each night, and Nahum felt this presence surrounding him, as though his very will were being drained by an insatiable energy. The well, once a source of life for the farm, had become the heart of a destructive force. Nahum's eyes, once filled with determination, now reflected terror, an ancestral terror, as if he, deep within himself, understood he was witnessing something that did not belong in this world. The story reaches a point where the Gardner family can no longer endure their plight. The isolation and suffering continue for weeks until, finally, the villagers dare to intervene. A small group of men, faces etched with fear and doubt, approach the farm, but what they find defies all reason. The Gardner family members are mere shadows of their former selves, their bodies fragile, barely sustained by an artificial, sickly life. Nahum's final image is that of a defeated man, trapped in a world where his own farm has become a living hell. The well becomes the final point of the story, an abyss emanating a sickly light of an impossible color. The men look on, incredulous and horrified, realizing that something greater than them, something that defies the laws of nature, has turned the farm into a monument of despair and ruin. And in that well, that last remnant of life, that doorway to the incomprehensible, the horror of the story concentrates. The mystery of the color that fell from the sky finds its final refuge, leaving the men with a silent warning, a reminder that there are things in the universe that must not be disturbed. Thus, the Gardner family's story becomes a testament to human fragility before the cosmic forces governing the universe, a warning about the smallness of our understanding in the face of the secrets hidden in the stars. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting content. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, join our community so you don't miss out on anything. Thanks for your support. Now we delve into the very core of the enigma that terrifies and consumes the Gardner family, the color. This isn't just a simple phenomenon, nor a substance or a gas that can be categorized. This color represents something beyond human comprehension, something that defies those who dare to look upon it. Science, with its logical explanations and unchanging laws, crumbles before this color. The experts who observed the rock at first described it as unusual, unprecedented, yet none could capture it precisely. Because this color does not belong to this world. For Nahum Gardner and his family, the color begins as a faint glow that seems to pulse from within the meteorite. But over time, This unknown color transforms into a constant, silent, and ominous presence that gradually invades their home, their land, and their minds. It's something alive, something that seems to have a will of its own, and that will hangs over them, as if the color were watching from a dimension we can't perceive. How could a mere hue carry such malevolence? And yet every member of the family feels it. The color begins to manifest in the plants around the farm, spreading into every leaf, every fruit. The vegetation takes on strange, unreal shades, colors that don't seem to align with life or death. In broad daylight, the trees and bushes reflect muted glows, as if they were specters trapped in an unnatural painting. The crops, once a source of life for the family, now appear as a nightmare vision. They grow twisted and contorted, with shapes that defy natural symmetry. But the real anomaly lies in their color, in the way they acquire a spectral, eerie, unnatural glow under the moonlight. The color's manifestations also appear in the water. The well, which once provided pure, clear water, begins to change. The reflections it casts under sunlight or moonlight seem to come from another world. Nahum stares into the water with a mixture of fascination and horror, noticing how it takes on a hue he can't define, a color that seems to come from an alternate reality. It's as if the color infiltrates every molecule, slowly degrading what was once normal and turning it into a liquid abomination. The animals instinctively sense the danger, rejecting the water from the well, avoiding the vegetation, their eyes reflecting the fear of those who perceive imminent danger. For Nahum, his wife, and their children, the color becomes a silent obsession, a nightmare from which they cannot escape. Only they perceive the color's presence in its full intensity, an invisible evil gnawing at their sanity. They begin to lose sleep, hearing whispers in the wind, as if the color were trying to communicate, delivering a message no human mind is ready to understand. Each gardener begins to change, not only physically but spiritually, as though a dark shadow has settled over their souls. Mrs. Gardner's mental health deteriorates rapidly, and in her delirium, she mutters about lights and shadows that seem to dance in the air. She insists that these lights are of a color only she can fully see, assuring that they don't belong to this world. Her words are incoherent, filled with terror bordering on madness. Is it possible that the color has its own consciousness? That it came with some hidden intent? No one can answer these questions. Neither Nahum nor his children understand what is happening to their mother, but they all sense the looming danger. As the story unfolds, the color transforms into something more than an inexplicable phenomenon. It seems to take on a life of its own, manifesting in every corner of the farm and enveloping each family member. Nights at the Gardner farm become waking nightmares. Animals die for no apparent reason. Crops wither prematurely, and shadows stretch as though the color is altering the very perception of time and space. It is an immaterial evil, an invisible presence engulfing everything, piercing reality with overwhelming intensity. When neighbors begin to notice the changes on the farm, they refuse to approach. It's not merely fear of the unknown. It's terror of an evil that defies the norms of life itself. The Gardner farm becomes a forbidden place where nature has been replaced by something unnatural. Nahum's voice becomes a murmur among the few who dare to listen to his tale. His despair is evident, his words filled with silent panic as he tries to explain the inexplicable, yet no one truly understands what is happening to his land. The manifestation of the color is so powerful that even those who have never set foot on the farm can sense its impact. It's as if the air itself were filled with a sinister vibration, an echo of the unknown. That color, indescribable and alien, is now a tangible threat, a reminder that the universe is full of forces beyond human logic, forces that cannot be contained or understood. The color, in its immateriality, is pure horror, a reminder of our own vulnerability and the existence of realms we aren't prepared to face. Is it by accident that it fell from the sky? Or is it a kind of warning about what exists beyond the stars? The uncertainty surrounding the color is what generates the greatest terror in those who dare to hear this story. In the end, the color has no form or explanation. It is a force that needs no reason to exist, one that bursts into the lives of the gardeners as an omen of something far larger, something our senses cannot fully perceive. We find ourselves at the climax of this story, the point where all that was hidden, incomprehensible, and terrifying finally comes to light, though in a way the human mind can barely endure. The Gardner family has been gradually consumed by the presence of this entity, which seems to have embedded itself in every corner of their land, their home, and more disturbingly, their minds. The atmosphere is oppressive. Every shadow, every sound vibrates with a strange energy, as if the very air carries the trace of something alien to this world. For Nahum Gardner, this is the moment of truth, although this truth is more terrifying than he could ever have imagined. His wife lies on the floor disfigured, and in Nahum's words, turned into something no longer human. Her skin, like the plants and animals on the farm, has taken on that indescribable color, a color that seems to come from another dimension, a hue no man has ever seen on Earth. The illness infecting his family is not just a physical ailment. It is a kind of cosmic corruption, an evil that has seeped into the very bones of those who live on the farm. Nahum's sons have also fallen victim. The first was Merwin, the youngest, who, in a fit of madness, disappeared one night down the well. Nahum recalls with terror the last time he saw him, his eyes reflecting a mix of desperation and absolute terror, as if he had seen something in the depths of the well that human reason could not bear. Later, when Nahum tried to find him, all he discovered were traces of something that had been consumed. And then Thaddeus, the other son, also vanished without a trace, sunk into an inexplicable silence, as if the entity of the color had taken his life as some sort of tribute. As Nahum tries to rationalize what is happening, he begins to notice that the color grows stronger, its intensity swelling, and the presence becomes almost tangible. The light of that color shines from the well, projecting in every direction, illuminating the farm with a ghostly hue, as if the well were a portal to another world. At that moment, Nahum realizes that what fell from the sky and seeped into the ground is not merely a natural phenomenon. It is an entity, a being in itself, which has been absorbing and consuming everything it touches, growing in strength and presence. It's at this point that Nahum, in a state of desperation and madness, begins murmuring about what he has seen or what he believes he has seen in that light. He speaks of shapes and shadows in the water, of movements that cannot belong to this world, of faces that seem to distort within human agony. His mind is fragmented, his reason nearly shattered, but there is still something in his gaze that indicates he has grasped the danger, even if it's too late. Nahum knows that the entity of the color is not just an inert presence. It is a predator, something that seeks to consume everything around it, transforming it into something as incomprehensible as the very color it bears. There comes a moment when Nahum realizes that there is no escape. The light shining in the well grows more intense, filling the air with a glow that seems to permeate every corner of the farm. Nahum, in his last moments of sanity, tries to flee, but his body no longer responds. It is as if gravity itself is being altered by the presence of the color. His few moments of lucidity are spent trying to warn others, but he knows his fate is sealed. The Gardner farm has been condemned, and he, like his family, will be devoured by this incomprehensible force that has arrived from the deepest reaches of the cosmos. Over time, the townspeople begin to notice the strange changes on the farm. The air feels heavier. The sunlight doesn't penetrate the same way on that land, and a thick, almost ethereal fog has settled over the property. Some say that at dusk, strange flashes of color can be seen on the horizon, as if something were about to escape from the well and devour everything in its path. No one dares to approach. Those who do attempt to describe a feeling of dread and suffocation so intense that they prefer to turn back and leave. Finally, everything culminates on a stormy night. The electricity in the air seems to amplify the power of the entity. From the well, an explosion of light shoots into the sky, as if the entity were trying to return to its place of origin. The few witnesses present, from a distance, watch the spectacle in horror. The color unfolds in the air, forming shadows and flashes that should not exist, amorphous figures that seem to dance in the wind before being swallowed by darkness. And then, in a blink, the color vanishes. Silence falls. The farm is engulfed in total emptiness, a place where life seems to have been extinguished forever. When the townsfolk finally approach the farm, they find only ruins, the land dead, and the structure barely standing. There are no traces of the Gardner family, not even the animals. Only an empty well and the echo of a tragedy that defies all explanation. In The Color Out of Space, Lovecraft unfolds a series of complex and terrifying themes that capture the essence of his vision of the universe and humanity's place within it. This is not merely a horror story. It's a profound exploration of human insignificance, the incomprehensibility of the cosmos, and the fatality that lies within humanity's boundless curiosity. Let's delve into these themes, uncovering how Lovecraft constructs an atmosphere of utter hopelessness and uncertainty. One of the central themes of this work is cosmic horror, a recurring notion in Lovecraft's works, and one that presents itself here with disturbing intensity. This horror does not arise from creatures with defined forms or tangible monsters, but from an abstract entity, something that doesn't belong to our world and operates under alien laws and principles. The color that falls from the sky has a form beyond human comprehension, and it is precisely this lack of form and definition that makes its presence even more terrifying. Lovecraft invites us to reflect on how small and vulnerable humans are when faced with a universe where unknown forces can influence, consume, and transform without warning. This color, this entity, serves as a reminder that in the vast cosmos, our existence is almost irrelevant. This insignificance of humanity before the cosmos intertwines with the theme of the inevitability of destruction. The Gardner family is, in many ways, an innocent victim of forces beyond their understanding and control. They try to resist, fighting for their land and daily life, but the color slowly and inexorably consumes them. Here, Lovecraft offers no hope or escape. The Gardner's fate is sealed from the moment the meteorite strikes their land. This tragic and fatalistic destiny reflects Lovecraft's view of the universe, a dark, unforgiving place where human life is not only insignificant, but also subject to forces that can extinguish it without a hint of mercy. Another chilling theme that emerges in this story is the corruption and degeneration of nature. As the color infiltrates the soil and water, everything around it begins to crumble, corrupting in horrific, unnatural ways. Trees lose vitality, vegetation withers and takes on distorted shapes, and animals die or transform into something grotesque. Lovecraft demonstrates how this color is capable of perverting even nature itself, breaking the balance and harmony of life on Earth. The color is not only alien to our planet, it represents a threat to all existence within it. The very essence of life seems to alter under its influence, revealing a fragile and vulnerable nature that can crumble in the face of the slightest interaction with the unknown. The theme of the incomprehensible is another fundamental pillar of this story. Lovecraft chooses a color to represent this extraterrestrial entity because it lies outside the visible spectrum, something that defies human logic and the physical laws we know. This color seems to act with an intelligence of its own, but its motivations are unintelligible. Is it a predator? A natural force? We don't know, and that makes it even more frightening. To humans, any attempt to understand this entity is futile. Nahum Gardner, in his Last Days of Sanity, describes what he perceives as shapes in the well, but even these images are vague and disconcerting. The presence of the incomprehensible, of something we cannot classify or explain, permeates every corner of the story, reminding us that human knowledge has limits, and it is dangerous to attempt to cross them. This story also explores the psychological impact of confronting the inexplicable. As the color consumes everything around it, the Gardner family members not only experience physical decay, but also mental degeneration. Desperation, isolation, and constant horror drive Nahum and his family to the brink of madness. Lovecraft uses this aspect to show us how fear and despair can break the human mind, especially when faced with something that defies all logic and suggests the existence of uncontrollable forces. The human mind is shown as weak and fragile, unable to bear the weight of the unknown. Thus, this story also serves as a tale of the fragility of sanity, about how facing the incomprehensible can destroy us from within. Finally, another theme that Lovecraft subtly suggests is the danger of human curiosity. While the Gardeners did not consciously seek out this entity, the meteor's mere arrival awakens a series of inquiries and studies that, though superficial, reflect humanity's impulse to understand everything. However, this curiosity leads the characters and the reader to a point of no return. The color's presence is a warning that there are certain forms of knowledge we should not seek, that there are boundaries in the universe that should not be crossed, as the price could be our own sanity or even our very existence. In this way, Lovecraft combines these themes within an atmosphere of despair and horror, transforming The Color Out of Space into something more than a science fiction or horror story. It is a profound reflection on our position in the universe, on the vulnerability of the human mind, and on the thin line separating curiosity from destruction. Through the Gardener's tragedy, Lovecraft warns us that, in the vast and incomprehensible cosmos, humanity is just a small spark, a brief existence amid forces that could extinguish it in an instant. Reaching the end of The Color Out of Space, the story leaves us with a mixture of awe, terror, and even a sense of desolation. Lovecraft has taken us by the hand through a tale that explores humanity's insignificance before an unrelenting, merciless cosmos where unreachable, unknown forces can intervene at any moment, altering the course of life itself. But what does this story truly mean? What did Lovecraft intend to convey with the tale of a color? A mysterious alien entity that corrupts and destroys a family and their land. This story poses a central idea resonating through much of Lovecraft's work: cosmicism. Lovecraft was a profoundly nihilistic author who believed that humanity is but a tiny spark of life in an indifferent, vast universe. And here, in this story, we feel that belief intensely. The Color Out of Space isn't merely a story about a family falling apart under the influence of something strange and terrifying. It's a reminder that there are forces in the universe that don't abide by our laws or moral standards. Lovecraft creates a world where human order and justice have no place, where terror lies precisely in the total and absolute meaninglessness of the tragedies that unfold. Throughout the story, the narrative takes on an almost clinical tone, as if we are observing a disastrous experiment. The presence of the meteorite and then the color emanating from it seem to operate according to their own laws, detached from everything we know. It isn't an evil entity in the traditional sense, but a force acting without regard, almost like a natural phenomenon, though unknown and fatal. This idea is even more terrifying because it implies that the universe contains elements that can interact with us in devastating ways without even being aware of our existence. This introduces another core theme in Lovecraft's work: the incomprehensibility of the cosmos. The Gardner family, the scientists who investigate the meteorite, and we as readers are all ensnared in uncertainty. What is this color really? What exactly does it do to plants, animals, water, and humans? Lovecraft never gives us clear answers, and this lack of information is no accident. He shows us that there are things beyond our reach, that our limited, finite minds are not prepared to understand certain phenomena or creatures that may reside beyond the stars. The color itself is a character in the story, yet one without shape, purpose, or clear intentions. In many ways, it represents the notion of the unknowable. By giving horror an abstract form, Lovecraft intensifies the fear we feel facing it, as there is nothing tangible we can see or understand. The color is something that defies physical laws, something that defies our very perception, and that makes it one of the most unsettling and unique entities within the Lovecraftian universe. Furthermore, The Color Out of Space explores the corruption and degeneration of nature. What makes The Color so terrifying isn't just its capacity to destroy, but the way it perverts and distorts everything it touches. We see how the vegetation grows in bizarre ways, how animals suffer and die in horrific manners, and how the Gardner family, over time, deteriorates both physically and psychologically. The Color doesn't merely kill, it transforms and corrupts. In this sense, it represents the idea that even the forces of nature can turn against us, altering the balance and turning the very environment meant to sustain us into something hostile. Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of the story is how Lovecraft shows us the fragility of human sanity. As Nahum and his family succumb to the influence of the Color, we also witness how despair and terror push them to the edge of madness. Nahum, in particular, faces unbearable agony, knowing that something is destroying his family and his home without understanding what it is or how to stop it. This loss of control and the inability to comprehend what's happening deeply affect his mind, driving him to a point where madness seems the only escape. Lovecraft suggests here that horror can be both physical and psychological, and that, when confronted with the incomprehensible, the human mind can collapse irreparably. As we reach the conclusion of this analysis, we can say that The Color Out of Space is ultimately both a warning and a reminder. Lovecraft shows us a universe where the rules we know may be only a tiny fraction of a much broader and far more terrifying reality. The Gardener's experience is but one among many, a tragedy lost in the immense void of the cosmos. But for us as readers, it's a warning. Knowledge and curiosity can lead us to discover things beyond our understanding and, in some cases, beyond our capacity to endure them. The legend of the color that fell from the sky remains an enigma, an echo of what may exist in the depths of the universe, waiting to be uncovered. And though the story ends, that feeling of unease persists, the sensation that somewhere beyond our sight and understanding, there could be something similar, something like the color, beyond our comprehension that, if we were to touch, could lead us to a fate as dark and desolate as that of the Gardner family. In conclusion, this story is not only one of Lovecraft's most iconic tales, but also encapsulates the essence of his literary philosophy. It reminds us of our insignificance and vulnerability in a vast and unknown universe, suggesting that some things are best left unexplored. In a forgotten corner of Arkham's lands, the color has left its mark, and we, like Lovecraft's characters, are left with a blend of fascination and terror at the thought of what lies out there in the unfathomable depths of the cosmos. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting content. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, join our community so you don't miss out on anything. Thanks for your support.